Lila Carter never imagined her new beginning would start with a blizzard and end with a secret worth millions. Just days after finalizing her divorce, she packed up her 2 kids and set off for a new life across the mountains, only to find themselves stranded, freezing, and clinging to hope inside a crumbling hunting cabin. No cell signal. No help coming. And the storm? It was only getting worse. But just when Lila thought she might close her eyes and never wake up, a dog appeared. Not just any dog, this golden retriever seemed to know her. He stared straight into her soul and then turned to walk back into the blizzard, pausing only to make sure she was following. What happened next is something no one, not even Lila, could believe. The dog led them to a mansion. In the middle of nowhere. A mansion hiding more than warmth and shelter. Inside? A caretaker with a tragic past. A billionaire's face in every portrait, but no trace of the man himself. And a journal. Buried in the snow. Filled with secrets that could take down a criminal empire. This isn't just a story about survival. It's about why they were meant to survive. Lila Carter didn't plan on starting over in the middle of a snowstorm. But life rarely asks for permission. Just a month earlier, she had signed the final divorce papers, walking away from a decade of control, silence, and heartbreak. Her husband, once charming, had slowly become a ghost in their home, present but absent, critical but cold. The day she told him it was over, he didn't even flinch. He just nodded and said, "Good luck out there." So she packed up what little they had left, some clothes, photo albums, a box of toys, and enough snacks to keep her 2 kids from melting down during the long drive. Maddie was 8 and full of questions. Noah was 5, still clinging to stuffed animals and the idea that dads were supposed to be superheroes. Their destination? A small rental house in Mayfield, Montana, where Lila had secured a modest job as a school librarian. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. It was quiet, far from the city, and most importantly, it was a place where no one knew her name. She craved that anonymity like oxygen. But the weather had other plans. The forecast had called for light snow. What they got instead was a record-breaking blizzard barreling through the mountains like a freight train. Visibility dropped to nothing. The heater in her old SUV sputtered. And somewhere on Route 82, with no cell service and no passing cars, the engine gave its final cough and died. Panic crept in. Not loud and hysterical, but quiet and sharp, like the cold seeping into the car's windows. Lila wrapped her children in every blanket and jacket she could find. She told them stories. She sang songs off-key. She tried not to let her voice shake. But in her gut, she knew, they were in serious trouble. With wind howling like wolves and snow falling sideways, she spotted an old wooden structure through the swirling white, a collapsed roof, a broken window, but 4 walls still standing. A hunting cabin, long abandoned. She carried Noah in her arms and held Maddie's mittened hand like her life depended on it. And in many ways, it did. They huddled together inside, teeth chattering, hearts racing. Lila didn't say it out loud, but she was thinking the same thing over and over again. This could be it. This could be where our story ends. But fate, it seemed, had other ideas. Because that's when they heard it, the sound of paws crunching snow. A flash of golden fur in the blizzard. A dog, looking at them not like an animal, but like a messenger. And just like that, everything changed. Inside that broken-down cabin, time stopped. The wind outside was relentless, screaming through every crack in the wooden walls like it wanted in. The temperature dropped so fast it felt like the cold was crawling under their skin. Lila gathered her kids into a pile of sleeping bags and spare coats, doing her best to keep them warm, physically, emotionally, any way she could. No electricity. No heat. No signal. The silence between gusts was deafening. Maddie asked, "Mom, are we going to be okay?" And Lila did what mothers do, she lied with love. "Of course we are, baby. We're just camping. Remember?" But even she didn't believe it anymore. Hours passed. Then more. The sky turned black, and the cabin grew darker than dark. Noah had stopped asking questions. He just curled into her chest, his little body shivering in short, jerky bursts. That was when the fear got real, not dramatic, not panicked, just final. Lila began wondering how long it would take to freeze in your sleep, and how she could keep the kids awake long enough to survive the night. She whispered stories to them. Fairy tales. Adventures. Anything to keep them alert. She made up a tale about a brave dog who saves a family in the snow, half as a distraction, half as a prayer. Then she heard it. A rustle. A sound just outside the door. Her heart leapt, part hope, part terror. Bears were a real possibility in the Montana wilderness. But what stepped into the doorway wasn't a bear. It was a dog. A golden retriever, soaking wet and covered in snow, stood there, calm, focused, and strangely familiar. Not in a way that said, "I know this dog," but in a way that whispered, "This dog knows us." Lila blinked hard. Hypothermia could cause hallucinations. She was aware of that. But this wasn't a vision. The dog didn't bark. Didn't growl. Just walked in, shook snow from its coat, and sat down like he'd just come home. Maddie sat up, eyes wide. "Is he real?" Noah whispered, "Can we keep him?" Lila didn't answer. She was watching the dog's eyes, amber, intelligent, unblinking. He stared at her, then turned toward the door. He walked a few steps out into the snow, then looked back. Waited. Lila's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't random. It wasn't coincidence. This dog, who had appeared in the middle of nowhere during the worst storm in a decade, wanted them to follow. And suddenly, something impossible happened. Hope returned. Not because they were safe, but because something, or someone, was trying to lead them to safety. Lila didn't think she had the strength to move. Her legs were numb, her arms like lead. But when that golden retriever looked back at her, once, twice, then stepped into the blizzard again, she knew. This wasn't a stray. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a lifeline. She bundled Noah in her coat, took Maddie's hand, and followed. The wind clouded her face, snow bit at her skin, and visibility was almost zero. But the dog, somehow, always stayed just far enough ahead, never out of sight, occasionally turning to make sure they were still behind him. It was like he knew exactly where they needed to go. They walked for what felt like forever, 30 minutes? An hour? Lila didn't know. Just when she was about to collapse in the snow, Maddie gasped, "Look." Lights. Golden rectangles glowing faintly through the blizzard. Not stars. Windows. And then, it emerged. A massive mansion. Stone and glass. Elegant, ancient, and completely out of place in the middle of a Montana forest. Lila could hardly believe it was real. The dog bounded up the snow-covered stairs like he owned the place. Lila dragged herself up behind him, her breath ragged, her knees buckling. The front door, oak, with wrought iron detailing, was unlocked. Inside was warmth. Real, immediate, almost painful warmth. Marble floors. A sweeping staircase. Chandeliers. Paintings. It felt like a movie set. But the weirdest part? It wasn't abandoned. Lila called out weakly. "Hello? Please, we need help." No answer. The dog trotted inside like it was his home, sat at the base of the stairs, and wagged his tail once. A sound, footsteps, echoed from above. A man appeared on the landing. Tall. Silver hair. Broad shoulders. A face lined with years and something heavier, grief. His eyes locked onto Lila and her children. His voice boomed like thunder. "Who the hell are you, and what are you doing in my house?" Lila instinctively pulled her kids behind her. "We're so sorry, we were lost in the storm. Your dog, he found us. He led us here." The man narrowed his eyes. "My what?" "Your dog," Lila repeated, pointing at the golden retriever calmly sitting by the fireplace. "He saved our lives." The man stared for a long, stunned moment. Then he shook his head. "I don't have a dog." Silence. Heavy. Awkward. Unreal. "But, he's right there," Maddie whispered. The man's eyes drifted toward the dog. Something unreadable crossed his face. Pain? Recognition? Fear? "I haven't seen that dog in 5 years," he said finally. "And the man he belonged to, he's been missing ever since." That's when Lila realized they hadn't just stumbled into a mansion. They'd walked into a mystery. And the dog that saved them might not have been saving them at all. He might have been leading them exactly where he wanted them to go. The man introduced himself as Ethan Granger, the caretaker of the estate. But everything about him, from the way he studied Lila's face, to the way he spoke to the dog like an old enemy, hinted there was more to his story. They were offered shelter for the night. No warmth in Ethan's voice, but no refusal either. Just a gruff, "You can stay till the storm passes. The house has space." Then he turned and disappeared up the stairs, leaving them standing in a grand marble hallway that smelled faintly of cedar and old secrets. The dog, unbothered, trotted ahead. As Lila helped her children peel off their soaked layers, she caught sight of a painting, oil on canvas, large and proud, of a man in a charcoal suit, standing beside the very same golden retriever. The plaque beneath read, "Miles Whitaker. Billionaire. Philanthropist. Tech magnate. Gone without a trace 5 years ago." Maddie pointed at the painting. "That's him. That's the dog's real owner, right?" Lila nodded slowly. "Looks like it." Every hallway held a new question. Portraits lined the walls, Miles at different ages, different places. Sometimes smiling. Sometimes solemn. Always with the dog at his side. The deeper into the mansion they wandered, the stronger Lila's sense of something unfinished grew. The place wasn't abandoned, it was preserved. As if waiting. The dog, who Ethan never addressed by name, led them into a room that felt less like a living space and more like a memory. A study. Walnut-paneled walls. A desk untouched by dust. Bookshelves packed with worn leather volumes. And one empty space, clearly visible. A gap where a book had been removed. The dog sat beneath that empty shelf and stared at it, letting out a soft whine. "What is it, boy?" Noah whispered. Lila ran her fingers along the shelf. The space was just large enough for a journal. And something about the dog's focus, the way he didn't move, didn't blink, sent a chill up her spine that had nothing to do with the snow outside. The kids started exploring. Lila hesitated, then opened a nearby drawer, empty. Another. Then a third, filled with handwritten notes, letters, old photographs. Snapshots of Miles with employees, with charities, and always with that dog. "Why does he still act like he lives here?" Maddie asked. Like he's not lost. Like he never was. Lila looked down at the golden retriever, who now lay calmly beside the missing journal space, his head on his paws, eyes watching the room like a silent guardian. "He doesn't think he's lost," Lila murmured. "He thinks we're the ones who needed to be found." And just like that, she understood, the dog hadn't just brought them to safety. He had brought them to a story buried beneath silence. To a house that remembered. And to a truth that someone, maybe even Miles Whitaker himself, wanted them to uncover. The storm raged on outside, but inside the mansion, something deeper was unraveling. The next morning, the golden retriever, who now answered to Ranger at the children's insistence, was pacing by the kitchen door, tail twitching, eyes fixed. Not on the snow, but on something buried beneath it. Lila followed his gaze. The backyard was still a sea of white. But Ranger darted outside, paws slicing through snowdrifts with purpose. He stopped near the tree line and began digging furiously, sending snow flying like a golden whirlwind. Moments later, Maddie's voice rang out from the window. He found something. They ran to the spot, Lila, Ethan, and the kids, and uncovered a small, rusted trapdoor embedded in the frozen ground. Ranger pawed at it, whining urgently. Ethan's face went pale. "It's just an old storm cellar," he muttered. But the tightness in his voice said otherwise. Lila knelt beside the hatch, her fingers brushing over the frozen handle. "Then why is your voice shaking?" Ethan hesitated, then grabbed the handle and yanked. The door creaked open with a groan, revealing stairs that plunged into darkness. "No one's been down here in years," Ethan said, pulling a flashlight from his coat. "Not since Miles." He didn't finish. Together, they descended, Ethan first, then Lila, with Ranger leading the way as if this was the moment he had been waiting for. The space below wasn't a root cellar. It was a bunker. And it was meticulously organized. One wall was covered in maps, photographs, newspaper clippings, and red string, classic detective board style. Filing cabinets lined another wall. A laptop sat on a desk beside an envelope labeled, in unmistakable handwriting, "Ethan. For when the dog brings the right people." Lila's breath hitched. Ethan opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a letter from Miles Whitaker, dated 5 years earlier. The contents shattered everything they thought they knew. Miles had faked his own death. He had discovered a criminal syndicate, one responsible not just for corruption and laundering, but for the murder of Ethan's wife and daughter. Miles had gone underground, using his fortune and resources to infiltrate their network, collect evidence, and stay alive long enough to bring them down. But he couldn't trust anyone. Not even Ethan. Not until the time was right. The letter ended with chilling precision. "If you're reading this, then Ranger did what I couldn't. He brought someone who still believes in justice. Everything you need is here. It's time." Ethan sat heavily on a chair, the letter shaking in his hands. Lila stood frozen, staring at the wall of evidence, the faces, the financial records, the emails, the offshore accounts, even photographs of meetings, handoffs, bribes. And in the middle of it all, at the center of the web, was the name of the man responsible for destroying Ethan's life. Victor Delano. Miles hadn't disappeared. He had gone to war. And now, it was Ethan's move. They barely had time to process the gravity of what they'd uncovered before Ranger's ears perked up. He bolted up the cellar stairs, barking, not frantically, but purposefully. Moments later, a car engine. A sleek, black SUV pulled into the snowy driveway, tires crunching the ice like thunder on snow. Ranger stood waiting at the front steps, tail still, gaze locked. Lila instinctively shielded her kids as a man stepped out, tall, silver-haired, weathered like the mountain itself. He moved slowly, eyes scanning the mansion, until they fell on Ethan. For a moment, the world stopped. Ethan's breath caught. His lips parted, but no words came. His eyes locked on the stranger as if seeing a ghost. And in many ways, he was. Because the man standing before him was Miles Whitaker. Alive. Changed. But undeniably him. Miles? Ethan's voice was hoarse. Disbelieving. Angry. Hopeful. Miles gave a small nod. "It's me." Ethan stepped forward, fists clenched. 5 years. "I thought you were dead." "You had to," Miles said softly. "If you'd known the truth, they would have come after you too." "I couldn't risk it." Not after what happened to Laura and Claire. Behind them, Ranger barked once, as if confirming every word. Miles continued, I embedded myself in Delano's organization. Changed my name. Burned my identity. I became invisible, so I could get close. And I did. I found everything. The names, the bribes, the murders, the laundering. Lila listened, stunned. This wasn't just survival. It was sacrifice. Miles had given up his life, his name, even his best friend, all for justice. Miles handed Ethan a hard drive. This is everything. I've already sent backup files to the feds. A task force is moving in on Delano and his men as we speak. Ethan looked down at the hard drive in his hand, then up at the man who had once been his closest friend, and the dog that had brought them back together. You let me grieve you, Ethan said, voice cracking. You let me believe I'd lost another person I cared about. Miles looked away, guilt in every line of his face. I know. I won't ask for forgiveness. Just understanding. The silence between them stretched long. Then Ethan reached forward and pulled him into a hug. Rough. Unspoken. Real. And Ranger, tail now wagging freely, let out a bark that sounded suspiciously like relief. The past 5 years had been haunted by death, by silence, by secrets buried too deep. But now, the truth was out. Justice was no longer an idea, it was in motion. Miles had returned not just with evidence, but with purpose. And Ranger, loyal, unshakable Ranger, had fulfilled the mission he'd been entrusted with all along. To bring the right people together. To finish what had been started. And to lead a broken family, not to safety, but to redemption. The storm cleared. Roads reopened. Arrests were made across 3 states. Victor Delano, the man who tore Ethan's life apart, was in custody by sunset. But something deeper was happening inside the mansion. A quiet shift. The silence that once haunted its halls was replaced by the distant sound of children laughing, the clinking of mugs in the kitchen, the soft murmur of late-night conversations. It didn't happen all at once, but slowly, gently, like spring melting through a long winter. Lila and her kids were supposed to leave when the roads cleared. But when the tow truck finally arrived with their repaired car, they didn't pack. They cooked pancakes instead. Ethan had changed, too. The man who once lived like a ghost was now sitting at the dining table teaching Noah how to shuffle a deck of cards, badly. Maddie had taken to calling him Captain Serious when he wasn't looking. And when he was looking, she smiled, and he smiled back. One afternoon, as golden light spilled across the living room, Lila turned to him and asked, So, what happens now? Ethan paused, then said softly, I think the house finally feels like a home again. But only because of you 3. They didn't talk about the past much. They didn't need to. The pain was still there. It always would be. But it no longer owned them. Instead, they began building something new. Day by day. They turned one of the spare rooms into an art studio for Maddie. Noah hired Ranger as his full-time bodyguard and built him a pillow fortress in the den. Lila started helping Miles convert the mansion's west wing into a retreat space for families rebuilding their lives. Even Miles, who had lived 5 years as a ghost in the shadows, found himself returning, not just to the house, but to life. He bought a modest cabin 10 miles away but came by often, usually under the excuse of delivering books or supplies. Always staying just long enough to play a game of chess with Ethan or help Maddie fix a broken hinge on her birdhouse project. One evening, Lila stood on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the pines. Ethan joined her, holding 2 mugs of tea. Do you ever think about how weird this is? She asked. How we got here? All the time, he said, his tone warm. And every time, I come to the same conclusion. What's that? We weren't just saved by a dog in a snowstorm. We were chosen by him. She looked down at Ranger, curled on the porch beside them, head resting on his paws, eyes watching the sunset like a soul that had finally found peace. A soft smile curved Lila's lips. "Then I guess we owe him everything." Ethan didn't answer. He just reached for her hand. And for the first time in a very long time, she let someone hold it,